Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another online program from the Adams County Historical Society. My name is Antigone Ladd, and I serve on the board here, and I'm delighted that I'm able to be your host for several of these programs because I'm learning as much as any of the people in our audience, and I've had a chance to meet some delightful speakers. I hope you've been enjoying the series as well. If so, I hope you will consider making a donation to help us keep the programs running. There is a button on the bottom of your screen that makes it safe and secure to make a donation of any size, and we would appreciate it very, very much. Our speaker this evening is Charlie Fennell, a licensed battlefield guide here in Gettysburg since 1986. Charlie is a fascinating guide. I have been on some of his tours and attended his sessions. He makes learning fun. He has a way of telling a story that brings it to life and makes you want to know more. He has become an expert on Culp's Hill, and that is the topic that he's going to talk about this evening, but from a slightly different perspective. Charlie's going to, of course, cover the basics of the battle and why and how it happened here in Gettysburg and the people involved. But I've asked him if he would talk about what happened after the battle, why it was visited, why the visitation dropped off at some point until it suddenly became a not very popular area, an important part of the battlefield for tourists, and how that has changed. And he's also going to talk about the new renovations planned for Culp's Hill. So Charlie's going to walk us through the history of the importance and significance of Culp's Hill and the changes for today. But let me start by asking Charlie a personal question. If he would introduce himself by telling us a little bit about his background, how and when did he get interested in this very specific topic of Culp's Hill? Probably the least known part of the battle for most tourists. Charlie, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about what piqued your interest and how you started doing the research that has turned you into the Culp's Hill expert? All yours.
Well, people often ask me, where did you get your interest in Culp's Hill? And it was when I was working on my PhD at West Virginia University. I was guiding at Gettysburg. I started guiding in 1986, and I was nearing the decision phase in my studies to pick a topic. I found that I was spending a lot of time at Gettysburg, and so I decided that perhaps the best thing for me to do would be to pick a topic on Gettysburg, so that I could put the two together, guiding and researching the PhD dissertation at the same time. And I found that talking to people, not too many really knew what happened on Culp's Hill. I mean, you had the general understanding, Spangler Spring and the fighting, the trenchments, this sort of thing, but no one could really tell me, beyond that. And so well, wow, I can do this and actually find out something that I didn't know before, which is what research is all about. And so I started researching it and eventually got the PhD and on Culp's Hill. It was focused on Greene's Brigade, primarily in the fighting on July 2nd there. So it was more of a tactical study, but I found much significance in the fighting as for the future. I mean, for modern warfare. I mean, you have entrenchments, you have interlocking fields of fire, you have basically a slugfest of people shooting at one another. It's almost like the vision of World War I there on Culp's Hill on July 2nd and 3rd of 1863. And so this is how I became, I guess, the go-to guy, if you will. If you have a question on Culp's Hill, go ask Charlie. Okay. There are quite a few people now which have a very, very good understanding of Culp's Hill. Basically, it's most of them are, guys from Guide Force of Gettysburg that have to deal with that hill and have to deal with questions that people ask. So that's how I got interested in Culp's Hill. I'm still interested in Culp's Hill, and I'll be very happy to see that hill return to the way it looked in 1863. Tonight we're going to be talking about the importance of Culp's Hill and the Battle of Gettysburg for the Adams County Historical Society. Culp's Hill, as we know, is one of the three major terrain features of the battlefield of Gettysburg. They're a story of three hills, Cemetery Hill, Little Round Top, and Culp's Hill. The two most important of the hills would be Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill that you see here on your screen. Yeah. Okay, here you can see Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, two of the most important terrain features of the battlefield of Gettysburg, because they dominate the Baltimore Pike. Here in the base of this photograph, you can see a part of the Baltimore Pike. The story of Gettysburg, of course, is a story of roads. 10 roads converge on the town, and the most important of them, of all the 10 roads, is the Baltimore Pike. As we know, it doesn't go to Baltimore, it goes to Washington, D.C., and the Army of the Potomac, commanded for the first time by George Gordon Meade, has the mission of trying to screen Washington, D.C. from the Army of Northern Virginia and Robert E. Lee. So controlling the road here at the base of this photograph is key to understanding the battle, especially after the first day's encounter. Okay, as we know, the first day encounter was an accidental chance meeting of the two armies as they were maneuvering for position in south central Pennsylvania. 10 roads brought them into confrontation at Gettysburg. Okay, the first day of the battle of Gettysburg resulted in an incomplete Confederate victory. And as we know, the Northern troops retreated through the town of Gettysburg back to Cemetery Hill that you see here in the foreground. And there, the importance of Culp's Hill becomes known. This is a man many of you recognize as General Winfield Scott Hancock. He was sent by George Gordon Meade, who's new to command, as we know, to assess the situation after Meade was informed of the death of General John Reynolds. So Hancock arrives at Gettysburg around 4 p.m. and notices the Union retreat back to Cemetery Hill. He's there to assess the practicality of fighting a battle at Gettysburg. And so as he looked around, he noticed that the hills tended to dominate the main road, Baltimore Pike, which was the line of command and control for the Union Army, as well as the main line to Washington, D.C. And he wrote Meade a note, and he said, "We have a great position here as long as it's not turned." And so Hancock was the first to recognize the significance of Culp's Hill and sent Wadsworth's division there roughly around 5 p.m. on the evening of July the 1st to take possession of it, because if you don't hold Culp's Hill, it's very difficult to hold Cemetery Hill. So Hancock is the architect of the famous Gettysburg fishhook line. If you remember how that works, Culp's Hill is the barb of the hook or the short end. It bends around Cemetery Hill and then winds up anchoring on Little Round Top. Okay, and so Culp's Hill is an integral part of that fishhook position. Here's the Baltimore Pike. This is an Edwin Forbes sketch done during the battle. This is a more watercolor rendition of it. All that traffic you see with the wagon in the foreground here, this is the Baltimore Pike. Okay, this is the most important road of the 10 that come to Gettysburg. This is Cemetery Hill here that goes right over the top, and over here on the right is Culp's Hill. Okay, so Edwin Forbes is showing us the importance of the Baltimore Pike to the Union Army, but also the importance of these two hills which dominate that Baltimore Pike. So this is the reason why Culp's Hill was necessary for the Union to hold. Okay, we know on July the 2nd that General Lee will plan an offensive. It will be conducted initially by General Longstreet upon the Union left, which, if you remember, is Little Round Top, to be supported in the center by General Hill's 3rd Corps, and then General Ewell's 2nd Corps to make a simultaneous demonstration to be converted into a real attack should the opportunity present itself. As that battle progresses and Longstreet begins to drive in Sickles' salient, Meade will order the entire 12th Corps off of Culp's Hill, perhaps his greatest mistake in the Battle of Gettysburg. Certainly one of his officers said so. Oliver Otis Howard said the greatest mistake made by us at Gettysburg was to order the 12th Corps off of Culp's Hill. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the proximity of the Baltimore Pike to Culp's Hill. So as the Union troops were leaving Culp's Hill, the Confederates noticed And here you can see their assault on July 2nd. So Culp's Hill would be attacked by Johnson's division of 3 brigades, and Greene's 1 brigade will be left behind to defend the hill. Greene has approximately 1,424 men. Johnson will bring nearly 5,000 men to the attack. Nowhere on the field of Gettysburg, even on the first day, did the Confederates have such a numerical advantage as they did on Culp's Hill on July 2nd. Clearly 3-1 in numbers at this point. Okay, Greene's men were able to stave off the attack. They will lose the lower part of the hill, which is the only part of the Union fishhook that was occupied and held by the Confederate Army during the entire Battle of Gettysburg. And if you look at this map, once again, you can see Confederates who will seize this portion, lower portion of the Union line, just above Pardee Field, will be within not much more than 500 yards of the Baltimore Pike. And although this map shows artillery in position, these guns were gone on July 2nd. They had followed the 12th Corps off towards the Peach Orchard and were not there. So there's very little, if anything, between the Confederates and the Baltimore Pike here on the lower slopes of Culp's Hill. Okay, so on July the 3rd, as we know, one side knew how close they came to winning the battle. That would be the Confederates. And the other side knew how close they came to losing the battle. And that would be the Union. And both sides channeled in reinforcements on July 3rd to the tune of about a little over 9,000 Confederates and a little over 12,000 Union troops, roughly about 40 yards apart, waiting for it to get light enough on the morning of July the 3rd to know who to shoot at. And that action will begin roughly at 4:30 in the morning and will continue until nearly 11:30 that day. Roughly 7 hours of close combat. It's the longest sustained major fighting of the entire Battle of Gettysburg. And when it was over, the Confederates were unable to seize the hill and then were forced to retreat, giving up ground on the Union fishhook that they had controlled for the first time in the battle. So if you want to really see the receding tide of the Confederates, that can easily be seen here on Culp's Hill on the morning of July the 3rd. So that gives us a little overview of the fighting on Culp's Hill and hopefully a little bit of the significance of it. There was very significant at the time of the battle. In fact, one Union soldier said the battle could not have been won except for what Greene and his men had done on Culp's Hill. Okay, so this is a participant in the battle. Another participant said the battle was very significant, not for the numbers involved, because the numbers there are very small in relation to fighting on other parts of the field that are much more famous today than Culp's Hill, but for the results that would have occurred had Greene's men not been able to stave off the Confederates on July the 2nd. And Culp's Hill initially was one of the more visited parts of the battlefield that I'll attempt to show you here. One of the things that you can see on Culp's Hill, even right after the battle, were the Union breastworks. On July the 1st, as I indicated earlier, General Wadsworth's division was sent to Culp's Hill. They had been pretty well shot up on the first day of the battle. That's the Iron Brigade and Cutler's Brigade, for those who want more information. And they erected a series of breastworks. In this photograph, here, which was taken in the 1880s, from Culp's Hill looking at Cemetery Hill, you can see the breastworks running through the wood line. You could see them today if you come in December, because this area today is all overgrown there and very little can be seen. But those are still in the woods. This would be breastworks of the Iron Brigade there that had fought so desperately on July the 1st. Here's another view of the breastworks that were constructed by the Iron Brigade looking up towards Culp's Hill from Stevens Knoll. So this, in many ways, ladies and gentlemen, are the first monuments at Gettysburg. They were built by the soldiers to defend the ground there and were preserved after the battle. Okay. Of course, the architect of victory on Culp's Hill would be George Sears Greene. Greene is somewhat a forgotten hero of Gettysburg. There he's 62 at the time of the battle. He was born in 1801, died 1899, he lived to be 98 years old. 62, as I said, at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. He was second in his class at West Point in 1823. I guess he didn't try hard enough. But the guy that graduated first, for those that want to know, was Alfred Mordecai, and Greene married Alfred Mordecai's sister, his first wife, who died with their 3 children in the 1830s. So Greene got out of the Army, went into engineering projects. He missed the Mexican War. In 1861, when the war begins, he is the city engineer of New York City. He actually designed part of the city and established the Croton Reservoir, that which New York still gets drinking water from to this day. Okay. At Gettysburg, he's a brigade commander and commands a brigade of all New Yorkers there, and they were the ones that were left on Culp's Hill. Greene here has a monument on Culp's Hill. It's interesting to note that there are only 2 brigade commanders on the entire battlefield of Gettysburg that have standing portrait monuments dedicated solely to them. And one is General Greene, and the other one is General Webb in the angle. Okay, so these guys here, they must have done something very significant to be distinguished by having their own standing portrait monuments. Greene Monument was dedicated in 1907, just about 8 years after his death. And he's pointing at his line on Culp's Hill. He was famous enough to rate a postcard in the early 1900s. And there you can see Greene once again pointing, and in the background, the tower erected on Culp's Hill. The tower was put up in 1895, monument 1907. So this is roughly around 19 teens that you find a postcard. So Greene's still on the hill to this day, but these are the breastworks that he had his men construct. And this is, to me, is one of the most significant pictures of the Battle of Gettysburg. These entrenchments that you see here were constructed on the morning of July the 2nd by men of Greene's New York Brigade. And they're fairly substantial, as you can see. You can see 2 individuals sitting on a rock, and they are 2 of Brady's photographic assistants. Brady, as you know, would always put a figure in his photograph so you would know the scale of the picture that you were looking at. A couple of things you note from this photograph, the substantial nature of the breastworks, of course. You can see the head logs on the top. This is military engineering at its finest. Here's the head log, as you can see, because if you stick your head up over the breastwork, what's sticking up is your head. Head rhymes with the word dead, and there's a reason for it. If you're shot in the head, you're pretty much done. And so they would put these head logs, they would shoot under the log and over the wall, and this gave them some protection. You also notice that the breastworks turn. Okay, so Greene is establishing what we today would call interlocking fields of fire. So as the Confederates advance, they will be channeled into this killing ground between converging fields of fire. This is still as valid today as it was in 1863. One of the things I do want to point out in this photograph and in several photographs that I will show you in the course of this program is how little undergrowth there is in this photograph. And this is the way the hill looked in 1863. This photograph, ladies and gentlemen, was taken on July the 15th, 1863. So what did it look like then? It looked like this, exactly like this. Okay, and these woods at Gettysburg were considered what we would call today manicured woodlots. The farmers would allow their animals, especially cows, pigs, to wander through the woods and eat the undergrowth. Okay, they also used the trees for firewood, for fence rail replacement, and to be sent to sawmills for board lumber. And so these woods are constantly being gleaned of trees there. So this is the way they would look in 1863. It's hard to envision fighting on Culp's Hill if you go there today, because you can't even see into the woods, let alone walk through them. Okay, and so this photograph is very instructive along those lines. And this is the beauty of General Greene, military engineering at its finest. Here's the vision of them today. Can you find them? Well, they're right here. The breastworks right there. This part of the hill is maintained because that's where the monuments are. Okay, and so they have to mow there. But this part has been allowed to go back to nature. And so it's one of the reasons Culp's Hill is not as well visited today is because what do you see when you get there? And the answer is very little of the significance of the fighting on Culp's Hill. In fact, these two guys are sitting on a rock. That rock is right down here by this big tree there. So you can actually sit on that rock and get your picture taken right there as if you were in the Battle of Gettysburg. Here's another photograph which indicates one of the reasons why people came to Culp's Hill. You can see battle damage. These are trees, and these holes in them are bullet holes. They're shot all the way up and through. This gentleman was the man that was sitting on the rock in the earlier photograph. Brady told him to go down there and lay down, and Brady initially labeled this dead Union soldier on Culp's Hill. Okay, but anyway, you notice this. It looks like brush laying down at the forest floor. That's actually limbs shot off the trees that have fallen down. On July the 3rd, in 7 hours, John White Geary's division, 3,900 men. Okay, and this is without casualties, of course, which they had taken a few by that time, will fire 277,000 bullets. 3,900 men, 277,000 bullets in 7 hours. Let's look at 24,000 men in 7 hours. How many bullets will they fire? And the answer is they will fire well over 1.5 million bullets were fired on the slopes of Culp's Hill just on July 3rd alone. This does not include the 3 hours plus fighting on July the 2nd. So if you want to see battle damage, you go to Culp's Hill because that's where you would find it at the time. This is Matthew Brady sitting on a rock. You can see a big rock here, once again, shut up trees. This is to the left of the other photograph I showed you where the gentleman was lying down. These are called the Forbes rocks today because he sketched them there, and you can see the holes in the trees there. This rock is missing today. You won't find it if you go to Culp's Hill because it's Greene's headstone. They took this rock from Culp's Hill and put it over Greene up in Warwick, Rhode Island, which is where he's buried today. So once again, you see the holes in the trees. Look how open the undergrowth is there in this photograph. Here is a sketch. This is a Forbes sketch. Here you can see the rocks. See how open they are. And these rocks, this is the rock that Brady was sitting on in the previous photograph. And here you can see the Union line up here behind breastworks, and the Confederates desperately trying to move up to try and seize that position on July 2nd and once again on July 3rd. Notice once again in this sketch, very little undergrowth, hardly any at all. So it's an open forest. Okay, here's a fuller view of it there. These rocks are still there, obviously. These are the Greene rocks, Forbes rocks, Confederate rocks, if you will, Union rocks there, and they're not very far apart. They're not very far apart indeed. Let me think. You're probably looking at less than a football field distance between these rocks in 1863. Here you can see Confederate reinforcements coming up to try and push over the hill. In this sketch, notice the broken limbs on the trees there, and of course the rocks giving the Confederates some cover, not as much as the Union forces have there. This is a Rothermel painting. Many of you might remember Rothermel. He painted where Pennsylvania won the war at Gettysburg. And this is one of his famous paintings. Here it's up in the rotunda, I guess, of the Capitol in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And this is Geary over here, John White Geary of Pennsylvania, 6'5", 205 pounds. He commands the White Star Division. You can see a white star on the flag. And this is Kane's Brigade. And once again, you can see here the line that the men have as the Confederates made one last desperate assault to try and break through the line and gain the Baltimore Pike in the rear of the entire Union Army. Once again, the reason I show this is to show you how open, once again, the woods are. Okay, here and here alike. Okay, the Confederates were unsuccessful in this last desperate attempt. It occurred probably around 10:30, 11 o'clock on July the 3rd. And once again, you can see the Union earthworks, breastworks, if you will, defensive position, forcing the Confederates into converging fields of fire. Okay, so once again, this is a sketch. Now, of course, Culp's Hill, as I indicated earlier, was one of the more visited areas and certainly was considered one of the most significant areas of the fighting at Gettysburg. This rather, unexciting monument, if you will, unless you're from Massachusetts, is most important because this is the first unit, the 2nd Massachusetts, to document their battlefield position. 1879, the men from Massachusetts assembled. This is actually an 85 photograph as they came back for a reunion. But anyway, here you can see the monument and the survivors of the 2nd Massachusetts and friends as they're assembled there to remember the fight that they made here on July 3rd, 1863. This starts what we today refer to as monument madness, because if the 2nd Massachusetts has a monument, everybody else wants one too. And so from this, every Union unit in the Battle of Gettysburg will have at least one marker on the field to document where they fought. But that starts here at the base of Culp's Hill. They're actually looking into Spangler's Meadow. Behind this little rise is the Baltimore Pike. Okay, so this is the 2nd Massachusetts Monument, 1879, the first unit monument on the field at Gettysburg. Interesting to note that the first Confederate monument placed anywhere on the field at Gettysburg was placed on the lower slope of Culp's Hill. And this is the 2nd Maryland. It's really the 1st Maryland, but they made them change it to 2nd Maryland on the front. Go around the back, it says 1st Maryland. 2 flank markers. It's the only Confederate monument that has flank markers. Say 1st Maryland. The advance marker says 1st Maryland, and the 2 government tablets that mention it say 1st Maryland. So what is it? Is it the 1st or the 2nd Maryland? I would argue it's the 1st Maryland. In fact, it's the only Maryland infantry unit in the Confederate Army at Gettysburg. Hence, you see CSA, Confederate States of America. This monument was placed here and dedicated in 1886 on November 19th. That date may ring a bell with some of you. That's the date that Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address, but that was in 1863. I think they picked that date on purpose, suggesting that the Confederate dead were honored too. And so it went up. And this breaks the color barrier, ladies and gentlemen, because if Maryland can put a monument here, can Mississippi? And the answer is yes. So if they didn't allow the Maryland Confederates to erect this monument on Culp's Hill, chances are you wouldn't have any Confederate monuments on the battlefield of Gettysburg whatsoever. Here in the foreground, you can see some rocks sticking up, a little bit of rising ground there. That's Union earthworks. The Confederates had seized these on July the 2nd. It's interesting to note that there was a little bit of a controversy involving this monument and the placement of it and the wording. The Union veterans, they established the Battlefield Memorial Association, and this was chartered by the state of Pennsylvania in April of 1864. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the war last until April of 1865? But yet you have an association established to preserve and memorialize the battlefield at Gettysburg a year before the war ends. So I think the people at the time realized what an important event Gettysburg was. And Culp's Hill was one of the initial purchases. I believe in August of 1863, 3 tracts of ground were purchased by a group of businessmen in town headed by David McConaughey, and they purchased Culp's Hill, East Cemetery Hill, and Little Round Top, as he explained, where the artificial and natural defenses saved the Union. Artificial would be the breastworks, the natural would be the hills themselves. Okay, and so this monument, as it was placed, the wording on the side said that they took these breastworks on July 2nd. The members of the Memorial Association said you didn't take them, they were not occupied. You actually occupied. And poor Confederates were thinking, well, if they weren't occupied, who was shooting at us then? Okay. But anyway, they got to arguing over this, and finally one guy down in, I think it was down in Pikesville, Maryland, where they were holding their meeting, suggested, well, if we took them, doesn't that mean we occupied them? And they said, yeah. And so they accepted the change of wording from took to occupied, and that's how the monument was allowed to be placed. If they'd insisted on keeping took, chances are they wouldn't have got permission to erect the monument here at Gettysburg. So just keep in mind that all the monuments, northern and southern, were reviewed initially by a board of veterans that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, and if not, in the Civil War. Okay, so it wasn't, that these were just put up here randomly. They had to be placed where they formed for battle, and what was on them had to be pretty much accurate. Okay, there. So this is the first Confederate monument, and for many years was the only Confederate monument on the field of Gettysburg. It was placed on, as I said, the lower slope of Culp's Hill. As I indicated to you earlier, people came to Culp's Hill initially. A number of reasons for that certainly was the battle damage I indicated earlier. Other was as accessible, it's close to the Baltimore Pike, which is one of the reasons why it was significant during the fighting. And of course, there's shade. Who wants to be riding around in a full dress, because when you went to tour in those days, you got dressed up. You didn't just go in shorts and a T-shirt. You wore tie, women wore skirts, full-length dresses. And so Culp's Hill provided shade there as you could tour the battlefield. They also had convenient springs, some Spangler Springs, that I'll mention a little later. You see a splintered tree here. That was splintered during the battle. These rocks you see here are Green's rocks. This is part of Green's trench line on the hill on July 2nd and 3rd, 1863. And here you can see Rogers liver pills. Oh my gosh, everybody's got to have liver pills, And here, Hoofland's German bitters. These are advertisements painted on the rocks on Culp's Hill. You're looking at it from the buggy trail, essentially. And so as you're riding your buggy up to get to the top of Culp's Hill, you'd look to your right and you would see these advertisements. Okay, the base of this photograph, which I believe is a copy, is the original is in the Adams County Historical Society's collection. There says commercial desecration of the battlefield at Gettysburg. And the date, ladies and gentlemen, is 1867. 1867. Okay, so commercial exploitation or encroachment, as we call it today, is not a new thing. At Gettysburg, it goes back, and here you have perhaps the earliest example of it here on Culp's Hill. Okay, here's Spangler's Spring. There were two springs. Okay, and once again, you can see the trees, but very little undergrowth. Of course, this is taken in the winter, maybe late fall, early spring, whenever. And here you can see the springs. The soldiers gathered water from these springs during the battle, though not simultaneously, as is sometimes reported. This area, the springs, became more significant as a symbol of reconciliation after the war was over. But here you see a gentleman there in his sports coupe stopping for a drink at Spangler Spring. But what I led to believe, I think one spring was for the people and the other was for the animals. Just got to remember to keep them straight. This is Spangler's Meadow, and up here is Pardee Field here above the trees there that you see in the distance. Okay, and so you can see he's either a local there or he's a tourist visiting Culp's Hill. Here you can see a modern group. This looks like the 1950s, maybe early 60s to me. And remember I told you they got dressed up to take tours in those days. And here they are sharing a cup here on Culp's Hill at Spangler Spring. Used to be able to get the water out of the spring. And then I believe in the 1960s, the Park Service put a water fountain in there so that you could go down and drink the water the soldiers drank. That was actually Gettysburg city water, but it was the thought that mattered. As you can see here, the spring was memorialized. There were three springs that were documented. The most famous is Spangler Spring. There was Menchie Spring at the base of Cemetery Hill, and Cadore Spring that was out near the Pennsylvania Monument. These all had iron tablets indicating their presence because they were used by Union soldiers to gather water during the fighting. Remember, they fought in July in wool uniforms, so one of the most precious commodities of the battlefield was the water that it could provide to the thirsty soldiers that fought there. So here you can see Spangler Spring and the people getting the water that the soldiers drank. You can't get water out of Spangler Spring today. In the 1990s, they took the water fountain out. And so it's just a shell of itself today, and you can stand there and see it and wonder why it's important. It's important because this is where the veterans would come to heal. Gettysburg was not only the killing fields, it was the healing fields of the Civil War, where the veterans of the blue and gray came to forget their differences. Okay, it became a great symbol of reconciliation between the North and the South. Of course, Culp's Hill today is one of the least visited areas of the battlefield. I always tell people we have two hills. We have one for the visitors, and that's a little round top, where people go in great numbers today, if for no other reason because of a movie called Gettysburg that emphasized the fighting and what the 20th Maine and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain did to save the Union at the left flank of the Union line on July 2nd. The other hill is Culp's Hill. That's for the locals, for people like us that live in Gettysburg, where we can go and walk our dogs and our husbands, okay, and be away from the hustle and bustle of visitation, even in the peak time in the summer. Culp's Hill is not as well visited, and the reason is there's not much to see when you go there. I mean, you go to Little Round Top, you get the view. Pickett's Charge, you get the view. Not many people go to Cemetery Hill because what you see are the encroachment of the town of Gettysburg on that hill there as well. Though some of the buildings on Cemetery Hill, like the Gatehouse, for example, were historic, were actually there during the fighting. But as you can see here, plenty of monuments on Culp's Hill. You have a double line of monuments on either side of the road, and there aren't many places at Gettysburg where you can drive and see monuments on both sides of the road. One of them is Hancock Avenue, which is Pickett's Charge area there as well. Okay, so people got out of the habit of coming to Culp's Hill probably in the 1890s, turn of the century. One of the reasons being is because modern roads gave you access to other parts of the battlefield, like Little Round Top. And once again, go to Little Round Top, got the great view, see the vistas there, which is awe-inspiring to this day. One of the interesting developments going on Culp's Hill is that they are planning to take out over 18 acres of woods and open the hill up to the way it looked in 1863. And as I showed you earlier, we have photographs that indicate what the hill looked like in 1863. That's probably going to start this spring. They're not going to take all the trees, but they're going to take probably about 80% of them, clear out the undergrowth. They're going to put in walking trails, interpretation, so that you can see the battlefield from the Confederate point of view. You can look up at Culp's Hill and see it the way the Confederates saw it. As one Confederate said, we needed scaling ladders to take that hill. You don't get that perspective from standing at the top looking down. Hills are much bigger from the bottom up than they are from the top down. If you don't believe me, walk them. You'll find out. So they're going to do that. They're going to put in waysides there for interpretation, including some of the photographs I showed you. They're also going to reconstruct some breastworks to show you what the breastworks actually look like on Culp's Hill. And so this is in the works going on. It's a 3-phase project. Okay, the first phase will clear out in front of a Greens line, which is here in this photograph. Okay, the second phase, I believe, will clear out down towards the Spangler's Meadow into Rock Creek there, and the third phase will clear the hill to the views that you can see Cemetery Hill from Culp's Hill. So eventually, given time, Culp's Hill will look like it did in 1863. And one of the things pushing this, of course, as some of you are aware, is they're going to close Little Round Top. They're going to close it for 18 months minimum for rehabilitation because the hill is being loved to death. It's wearing out as people climb all over it, look like a bunch of ants on a sugar cube, climb all over the hill. And Devil's Den as well, another attraction you can see from Little Round Top there. So where are the visitors going to go? And the answer, as the park superintendent explained in the meeting that we had on Zoom, why not Culp's Hill? Let's open that up, get some people over there, maybe spread out the visitation so that one hill doesn't get too much abuse or too much use, shall we say. Interesting to note, back in the 1990s when they established a plan for maintenance, a maintenance plan, given unlimited resources, they divided the battlefield into Class A, B, and C areas. Of course, a Class A area would be like Pickett's Charge, Little Round Top. Guess what class Culp's Hill was? Culp's Hill was Class C, lowest priority. Okay, so Culp's Hill may be coming into its own here in the next couple of years, and maybe will be as talked about or as visited as a Little Round Top if they can get it open and get people to understand it. So if you want to enjoy Culp's Hill, the privacy that it affords today, I would get there in the next 2 years because once this project starts, I envision much more visitation and people coming to Culp's Hill. So I want to thank you for letting me share Culp's Hill with you. I hope you have a better appreciation for the importance of the hill and the fighting, the significance of it, and I hope you're excited as I am about the restoration project that is in the works. Thank you so much.
Charlie, thank you for that excellent program. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and for sharing the news of the renovations coming up on Culp's Hill. And I thank all of you for being in our audience and continuing to support the Adams County Historical Society. I hope you will check out our website to follow news of our capital campaign as we try to build a new home for your history. Thank you and good evening.